Hi, I'm Brent Dawes, the writer and director of David, and you're listening to the Tim and Josh Show. Whoops. Hello.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I love your background, by the way. Is that like the art of the like
Yeah, some of the art of the movie. Yeah,
are those like the credits? I'm pretty
some
sure.
of them are in the credits. Yeah, some of them are in the credits.
I guess I'll just dive right on into it. I'm Tim, by the way.
Let's go.
You had mentioned, or someone had mentioned, that the David movie was kind of like in development for about 30 years. Why was it like in the think tank for 30 years, and what changed to finally make it happen?
Yeah, so the seed of the idea originated like 37 years ago with Phil Cunningham, who's the Sunrise Animation Studios owner, and the co-director on David. So he had the vision for it 37 years ago when he was canoeing down the Zambezi in Zimbabwe. This is before he had a film company or any, like long before that. So one
Right.
of the reasons that he started the studio in the first place was to try and fulfill that dream of telling the story. And but it's very much a crawl, walk, run thing. He was just sort of biding his time, waiting until he felt it was time to actually make it now. So it was just dating, just dating. So there was no work done on it for all that time. But it was 2014. He decided, along with his wife Jackie, to make it an animation, and he was like, "Okay, let's go now." So it's been in proper development since 2014, but gestation for a lot longer than that. Yeah.
When did you jump on the project? When did
So back in 2014, so I've been with Sunrise pretty much since it began in 2000, well, pre-2000.
Right.
But Phil, when he had the idea, he was like, "Okay, Brent, I'm going to do David as an animation. Can you write that?" And I was like, "Yes." So I was on since day one.
How many like drafts did the David movie script take? And was there any like major changes from the
Yes.
I will okay. Now you got me interested. What are some of the major changes that happened from like say draft one to the finished product?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you've got the whole script, which is from beginning to end, and there were 10 official drafts of that, but within that there was draft 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, and then a draft 3, and then even within that, I wrote the opening scene. There are probably about 40 to 50 versions of that full
Whoa.
takes of trying to figure out what is the best way to start this movie. If you were to read the original script and compare it to the final script, I'd probably say like 15% of it is the same.
Okay.
What I would also say is, though, I'd imagine that the tone would be similar. You'd say, "Okay, I see how this is related to the finished product."
Right.
But so much story refining happened, and we discovered so much along the way. A lot of simplifying, a lot of refining, a lot of us learning through the process what the story was really about. Because when you first start writing, there's so much to the David story, right? There's so much to there's too much. So what do
Yeah.
you leave out? What do you put in? What is the key thread? And those things took time and iteration to sort of get to.
With some of the things that had to be cut out because it was simplified, was there any drafts of the story that had Saul's daughter and like David and
Yes.
like the witch at Endor and things like that?
Yes. Yeah. So the first draft had the witch in it because it
Oh,
felt like an important, like when I was writing it, because Saul is able to speak to Samuel in that moment. It's very distinct. It's like, if you go to battle tomorrow, you're going to die. And it was very helpful, but also it created some. It seemed all of a sudden, where does a witch come from? you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and it poses some theological questions. So like, if there's going to be a witch, then we need to seed the witch in earlier, because you can't just suddenly have the story, then suddenly he's seeing a witch who's actually got supernatural powers.
Right.
It needs to be part of the story. And then we realized, no, but we don't want to give too much screen time to a witch. When I first wrote it, she was quite a comical character. And she was like, you have to just sign this disclaimer. Any spirits that come may or may not be the actual spirits. And, 'cause we're like, I was like, I'm just going to get out of this theologically by making Saul sign a disclaimer.
Yes.
Yeah, so then we took the witch out and found that we didn't need her to tell the story. So that's how we went about this. Is like, do we need this to help us tell the story? If so, then it earns its place. If not, can we? Because there's no telling that in our movie, we don't say Saul did not go to a witch. He could have gone to a witch. We just don't show it, you know. Likewise with the daughters, what we did, there were a couple of drafts where it's like, let's give Michal a go, you know, the daughter that David marries. And there were two things that happened. One was it became, when David was now exiled, now it felt like, oh no, he's been exiled from his love, and it was a love story. And it's like, but that's not what this story is about. This is a story about faith versus fear. It's complicating things, you know. That's not why we set out to tell this story. And the truth of the matter is, by the time he was king, he had 3 wives. And how do you choose which one? Do you know what I mean? And so we looked at everything, gave everything a chance, and if it survived the scrutiny we were putting it under, then it stayed in the script. If it didn't survive, so we took her out, and it's like, it moves so much better without her. It's so much more straightforward. It's a story actually about David and Saul. It's not about David and a wife. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's about David and God, not David and a wife.
Especially since he ended up having so many wives. It's hard for him.
So many wives, too much for us to worry about theologically.
Yeah. So the story of David has been around literally for thousands of years. Was it hard to try to tell it in a fresh way that people would be able to engage in, especially the David and Goliath part? Like, you could not grow up at the church at all and pretty much know the story of David and Goliath. It's like a metaphor. Was it hard writing that portion of the script, knowing that the big twist is already known?
That was a fun challenge. It was interesting. I would say what was hard in the writing of the story was linked to how do we decide what to leave in, and how do we put a narrative thread through all of that? Because the real challenge was, there's not one baddie. You know, there's not one villain. It's Saul, it's the Philistines, it's the Amalekites. And the Amalekites don't play a role until the end. So how do you seed them in all these things? So it was finding the right threads to tell a cohesive story in 100 minutes. But Phil was the one that said, because when I first started writing it, I was like, Phil, he was like, Brent, I want to write from when he was shepherd to king. And I kept going to him. I was like, Phil, can't I just finish with Goliath? Because that's a great climax to a movie. Do you know what I mean? And it allows me so much freedom to write, because there's not much about David before that. So I can make up so much stuff.
Right.
So much more freedom. And he's like, no, I want it to be until he's king. And which I think was absolutely the right call. But it was really exciting writing the Goliath stuff, because yes, everyone knows what happens, but what really was going on there, and what can we uncover and discover? And the key turning point for us was, a giant warrior like Goliath would be absolutely insulted, right, by a kid coming to face him. And it alludes to that in the Bible. It's like, how can you send me a child? You know, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks and stones? So there is that in the Bible. But it's like, what does it mean then when he finds out that you're fighting a God, not a kid? And that just feeds his ego and stuff. So that was just really fun to explore. And even though you know the outcome, it's still satisfying, because but it was so much fun.
My wife and I love the fake out with the person who you think is Goliath versus the real Goliath. When did that come into the drafts? And like, when did you decide that you were going to have Goliath as huge as he became?
That was one of the things that survived from draft 1. I wrote that in draft 1.
Really?
Because it was, as I was writing it, is how can I make this interesting and surprising for the audience? And I was like, this huge guy comes out, and I was like, well, what if that's not him? You know? And I was like, oh, that's so juicy. You know, everyone's like so intimidated by this guy, and that's not even him, which worked. So like every time I watched it with an audience, also my 11-year-old daughter, when she watched it with me, and she hadn't seen anything, and the armor bearer is coming out, and she's like, yeah, he's not that big. And then, you know, Achish says that's not him. And then when Goliath, and she's like, oh, it was so wonderful. But in terms of making him larger than life, we know that he wasn't that big. But David says, you know, it doesn't matter how big he is. We don't have to be accurate. Like, we don't have to go, okay, well, he was actually 9'6", so therefore let's make him 9'6", because the heart of it is it was God who was going to have the victory, not David. So whether he was 20 feet, 9 feet, whatever, however big David was, however small David was, that wasn't what was important. It was that it was clear that it was God's victory, not man's victory, which I'm so proud of in the movie because I think that really comes across.
When did the red fields, and was there any drafts where Goliath's head was chopped off, like in the Bible, or was
So,
that?
so let me say yes, and I'll explain, and I'll touch on your red field thing as well. Authenticity and accuracy was very important to us. So let me touch on the red fields first. We did multiple research trips to Israel. And I didn't even allow myself to think about writing the script until I had done a research trip to Israel, because like, I don't know what it's like there. I don't know what it feels like. How can I write when I don't, so I was like, I made sure that I went and then went with our production designer, Linton Levengood. And when you go to the Valley of Elah, where the David versus Goliath battle took place, it's like that. It's green and there's these red flowers. It's incredible. And everyone has this picture of a dry, dusty Israel. It's always the same. But in the Bible, it says in springtime, when kings went to war, if you go to Israel in springtime, it's green and there's flowers and there's life and it's incredible. So the red poppy, they're called anemones actually, are authentic to Israel and authentic to that time. And that could very well have been what it looked like when David fought Goliath. And I was so excited by that because when Phil said, Brent, I want you to write and direct this movie, I was like, where am I going to get color from? Because it's so bland. But then speaking about the cutting of Goliath's head, I was like, we can't show it graphically, but I could have a character narrating it as he's seeing it, like one of the brothers. It's like, what's he doing? Why has he got the sword? He's going for, he cut off his head. Why would he do that? That was part of one of the drafts, but it didn't really land. It wasn't necessary. But we've got a nod to it in that there's a tapestry in Saul's bedroom later on where Goliath is slain. David is standing on top of him and Goliath doesn't have a head. So it's in the movie for those that will pay attention,
The Amalekites. I really like how the Amalekites are portrayed in this film. It was really unique. So how did you decide that the Amalekites were going to have that unique look,
So a few things. That also goes down to the deep research that we tried to do for the script. We had a rabbi from Israel, Rabbi Tuli Weiss. We would let him read the script. We would let him look at all the things because, again, we don't know what we don't know. We don't want to inadvertently do something offensive to the Jewish community. We just kept checking a bunch of things, and we just also asked him for additional insights. Is there anything else you can tell us? And he said, there's deep mythology around the Amalekites and some of the Jewish texts that some people think they were shapeshifters, that they turned into animals and this and that. And so whether or not you believe that, our production designer's like, oh, that sounds great. I can use that in their look and their style. Do you know what I mean? So they live off the land. They're very earthly. They wear animal skulls on them. So we didn't make them shapeshifters, but we were inspired by that to sort of make them a little bit animalistic, a little bit otherworldly. We needed them to be very different to the Philistines. They had to have their own visual language and what have you. And also we needed them to not so much feel like a people, but more like a spirit of fear. Because that's kind of what they represent in our story, is that when there's division and fear among the people, that's when the Amalekites have power. And that's why they're overcome at the end by the faith of the people. They sort of just melt, and flee. But they were hard to crack. It was difficult.
I have to talk about the climax of the film because I even rewatched it last night with my wife in preparation for this, and I still got goosebumps. I guess what I'm asking is, how did you do that from a storytelling perspective? Like, what was it about that climax that hit so hard?
It was hard fought, and it took a long time for it to land, and even for the team to fully understand it. Right. But what I realized in telling the story is what David is trying to I love what happens when he faces Goliath, because truly what should have happened in that moment was, and he's saying it to them, it's like, it could be you, it could be you, it could be you, right? It doesn't matter who faces Goliath because God has the victory. And he goes out and is like, okay, fine, I'll go. And he's effectively like, see, God has the victory. And everyone's like, David, you're amazing. And he's like, no, he's like, you don't get it, So his whole, he's really trying to just show people, it's your individual faith is what is going to help you and help us, because it's not you individually that'll have the victory. And I think it's so satisfying at the end where he is helpless. And it's again him saying, when he went there, he put his faith in God again. He's like, doesn't matter what happens. And he says it to his brother, I'd rather die following the light than choose to live in the dark, you know? And so I think there's just something underneath that's been stirring that the audience starts to feel, you know, and it's that when they see him just walk in there again with faith, even if he gets hit on the head, the audience is like, how's God going to come through, you know? And God does come through. And I think that's why it's so satisfying but he comes through on the back of the faith of the people. I think it's satisfying because it's not David slinging his stone again. It's the culmination of what David has been trying to get the people to believe. And the audience is like, they get it. But even still, how's God going to come through? Oh, his brother gets it. Do you know what I mean? And then obviously with the easy win of just the sort of inspiring music. But also I think one of the interesting things that we had in our movie is we were very conscious of Prince of Egypt while we were making it.
Right.
But Prince of Egypt really had a tangible, tactile God show up in that there was a burning bush and Moses heard the voice of God. So we as the audience also have this distinct connection with God. Mm-hmm. And then when the Spirit comes and takes the firstborn, you see it. There's a very real sense and presence of God in the Prince of Egypt. He parts the sea. He shows up in a pillar of fire. In David's story, it's not that. You know, it's way more subtle. It's more internal. And obviously we nod to it with the butterfly, in nature, you know, God is present and what have you. And I think one of my favorite moments is when the light starts to shine and you see the deer standing there. And it just feels like God has shown up. And the audience finally gets to see, you know, and with the light, it's the most we lean into them seeing God. And I think that's just so satisfying after all this time.
Going off of the music, when you were writing the screenplay, how did you know, okay, this is where I want a song to go? And when you were writing the screenplay, we were just like, insert fun song here, or like baby song here, or
it actually worked. It was really what I really enjoyed about this being a musical is that the music is motivated from story. David actually is a singer. That's part of him as a character. You know, he had his lyre. He was a songwriter. So the fact he would sing to his sheep. The reason that he was brought before Saul was to play music. So the way I really tried to write it that when he would play music, we have a song. Rather than just, you know, he's walking down the street and someone bumps into him and then they just start singing, you know, more like a Disney movie where it's like washing the dishes and they just sort of burst into song. I'm like, why are you singing? You know? So I really tried to keep it to the point that he would actually sing in the situation. So therefore a song earns its place here. So I think you'll find every place that there's a song really is when he would sing, because also to me, it's a form of his connection with God. So it's also a form of prayer in our movie. So like when he's singing, "Why God, my God," you know, he's writing a psalm on the run, you know. So it was the songs found their place naturally when he would sing in the story, and it was lovely from that point of view. So, but yes, I would put placeholders. I'd be like, song here that inspires Saul.
One of the things I really like, which could have been, as you said, like very like Disney, like why are we singing right here, is when he's gathering his stones and he like hums and then ends with "I will not be afraid." I don't know what it is about that, but that was just right, in my opinion, as like a movie watcher. I'm like, if he was like, "I'm going to fight Goliath, I'm going to win," it would have been like, ooh, cringy. But the way it was done and like the payoff later with the Amalekites, really well done. As the director, how much back and forth did you have with those who composed the music where you're like, I'm not sure this is what we're going for. I'm like, this needs a little refinement. How did that?
Yeah, a lot. So I was very involved in that. So there were two forms of music in the movie. One was the songs, which were written by some wonderful writers. Then there was the score, which was handled by Joe Trapanese, who was the score composer. And the songs came first and were sort of woven in during the story process and animation process. And once we found our songwriters, I went across to the States and worked with them for a few days. So as they were working on songs, I'd be like, guys, let's find what is our anchor psalm? Because all of the songs I wanted to sort of have an anchor in a psalm. Even if they don't say a line from the psalm, what is the spirit of this, but you'll find that each of the songs does have an anchor in a psalm, and we'd really find what is it supposed to be saying. So there was a lot of back and forth with that, and then how that then sort of also informed the score a little bit, some of the themes that Joe was able to pull out. So there was a lot of involvement.
Saul, what were some of the challenges in making him three-dimensional and like showing his descent into madness without it feeling like jarring? Like, where did that come from?
We always just try to go to the scripture and see what it is that we see there and try and be as honest as we can within that. We had to hold our line quite a lot in story because we had a lot of people on a story front sort of saying, but in traditional storytelling, you need the villain to be this. But it's like, no, but that's not who we see Saul being in the Bible. He's a tragic character. He didn't ask to be king. It's true. Do you know what I mean? Like, he was like David, he never sought it out, but, and it did get to his head, but he did love David. David was the only one that could soothe him, but he had this love-hate relationship with David, and then the hate started to be the more powerful one, but when David cuts his robe at the cave and he comes out in the Bible, Saul is like, David, I know you're going to be king. You're a better man than me. Do you know what I mean? And Saul's heart is softened, but David knows that that's not going to last, because Saul is tormented and he's tossed. And so we felt that we just had to be faithful to that. The only thing that we felt that we did was like, is not really in the Bible. We didn't show that he took his own life. We gave him a little bit of redemption at the end, but at least just showing up and charging out with Jonathan. I don't think that was quite how it played out. But that was the one liberty we took because it just felt like we needed to have this sort of a little bit of, he still faces the consequences of all his actions and everything, but just have that little moment at the end. Yeah.
So with the Young David series, two questions. A, is that canon? And B is, what was the heart behind making Young David?
The way we've made David, we've really felt we've been led and given opportunities that prepared us for the feature film more than we could have sort of planned it out. Because when you said like, okay, what's been the 30-year journey? It's like, okay, so the 11-year journey was, the first thing we did was I wrote the script. On the back of that, Phil got some funding to do a demo, which was a 5-minute animation, which just helped us as a studio just to get our feet wet with it and give Phil a tool with which to raise further funding, which he was able to do. Then we got further funding and we started making the movie, but then COVID happened and we lost that funding. And it turned out to be a really good thing for us because we felt that we started going down a road that wasn't in our studio's DNA. And during that hiatus, there was a Christian streaming platform in the States called Minnow. They had seen the demo and they loved it. They didn't have budget enough to make a feature film, but they were like, we'd love to do some more David stuff. And it was in that gap once we'd lost our funding, and Phil was like, well, we can do some more shorts for you. And so they were like, yes. So they funded the 5 shorts, which was in the gap between when we stopped making the feature film, when we started again. And it was wonderful because it allowed us to live in the world of David, 25 minutes, creating the assets, feeling the tone, the humor, making some music. It just allowed us to really get the gears turning so that, and then during that, Phil was able to get more funding and we started the feature film on the back of that. So that just gave us a wonderful ramp and run up. So it wasn't deliberate from our part to say, okay, well, let's stop, let's do this. But it worked out to be ideal for us. And you ask if it's canon, it kind of can't be because Tali is in the shorts, but Tali gets born in the feature film.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like, but since then, I don't think you will have seen this. Maybe it's been released, but we have since created some connective tissue. And again, it works so well. Now that we've made the film, we've created a combined version of the shorts with Samuel telling a story in between them. So it's him saying, a king is out there, I know it, and I can feel it, and he's going to have the heart of a shepherd. And then we go to the episode where it's shepherd, and then we come back to Samuel, and he's around a campfire, and he's kind of like almost like feeling who is it that God is calling. And at the end of this sort of special now with all of these together, he stands up, he's like, yes, I know him. I don't know his face, but I know what he feels like. And he walks off, which kind of now does link to the movie, because we've seen now Samuel sort of touching in with God and feeling it. So there is a link.
When does that get released? Has it already been released or?
I don't know. It might have already been released.
Oh, yeah.
I might have given you a scoop. I don't know.
Oh, I got an exclusive. Yeah. With David in this movie, he has a little sister. When
Yes.
did that idea originate? And like, why did you think like we should give him a little sister, see him as a big brother? Why?
Yeah, so that was draft one. Writing it for a family audience, I had to just look for where is the fun? How can I make this playful? How can I, and just reading in the Bible, he had two sisters, Abigail and Zeruiah. I had used Abigail to start with because it's an easier name,
Mhm.
but then I found people got confused because one of his wives was also called Abigail.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so we had to swap her out. So I swapped out the name for Zeruiah. And she was it just gave me such a fun dynamic, this cute little spunky kid with Samuel the prophet. It gave me more to work with as a writer to just make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more family friendly. And again, everything that was in draft one was put through its paces and tested. And she just survived. The story needed her, the script needed her. It just added a lightness and a bit of fun.
Well, with the brothers, was it hard to try to make each of them distinct enough, even though they all have kind of like a little bit of screen time, so they're not generic?
Yes, it was challenging, and it was also there was a tierage of brothers. It was like the two that go on a journey with David
Mhm.
had to be much more rounded. So Eliab is the most three-dimensional of them. Benadab is who is with Eliab, not as three-dimensional, but he does go on a bit of a journey. Then we've got a couple that we see that I'm like, okay, well, we're just stereotyping these guys. He's the lazy one and he's the greedy one,
Yeah.
And then because there's a lot of characters in this movie. We couldn't overwhelm the audience with too many. And then, so I was like, let's make two of them twins because that'll help us with production anyway. And it's
Right.
also, and we know the audience can't track all seven brothers because we've got only so much screen time. So it was put a lot of effort into this one. These two can be some comic relief for us. And then he also had a couple of other brothers, which kind of feel like the same character, but with a similar voice. It was a challenge, but we think we got the balance right. But it was quite fun just to do little things, because you'll find on the fourth or fifth watch, you'll pick up certain things. Like there's when Samuel is talking and you see all the family there. There's one brother on the far side who's like really paying attention. And Samuel says, did God make us turn away from him? And the brother's going like this, and Samuel says, no. And his brother goes, mm. So they've still got some personality going on, but you have to look for it.
All right, so I'm going to ask a question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there any plans for a David 2, like the second Samuel version of the story?
No.
I didn't think so. I'm not sure how we can PG David and Absalom and Bathsheba and all.
No, where we got up to is like the safe, like the way that I'm describing it, most of David's challenges that he faces up until when he's king are external. Saul coming for him, people not believing in him, or like his brother and this and that. Once he becomes king, he creates problems himself, with Bathsheba, and it becomes very hard to tell that in a palatable way for a family audience.
Well, I think we dipped into a little bit of this before, but what are some of your favorite scenes from the movie, just how they turned out, and your like favorite songs?
I love the way that David versus Goliath came together. And I love that turn and it's Goliath's arrogance that makes him take off the helmet, and it's like, just the shot where he's challenging God, come down here, and the camera goes up and Goliath becomes so insignificant. We can't even hear him anymore. We're with God and we come back down and David is now the giant because he's been empowered by God. I think that just works. Just so thrilled with that. I love the ending. I love that it pays off, that this whole journey we've gone on, that when you see the light start to come, when you hear the music, you get the goosebumps and you feel, and it's like, yay. I get emotional every time I see that deer standing up there. It's just because it's so symbolic. And in terms of songs, they've all got a special place in my heart. And I'll say the one thing that I love, it's so wonderful when you are surprised as a filmmaker by something that ended up in the film that you weren't aware of, but speaks so loudly. We had different songwriters. So a songwriter called Jonas Myron wrote the Adventure Song, which is the first song that you hear in the movie. And with additional script lyrics by Ryan Shirley, she wrote the lyrics for the song in the end. Wonderful. Then in the middle of the movie, you've got the song Follow the Light, which is written by Molly Kate Kestner and Brock Monroe, husband and wife writing team. And then at the end of the movie, you've got the I Will Not Be Afraid song, which is written by Chad Carruthers and Ryan Shirley. So three different writing pairs, right?
Right.
The first line of Adventure Song is there's a light in the distance. And so that's the beginning of the movie. And there's something in the distance. There's a light in the distance. The first line of Follow the Light is there's a light I've always followed. And that's it's a little bit closer, and it's telling a story. And the first line of I Will Not Be Afraid is the Lord is my light. And that was not done by me, in collaboration with them. And I just love that. And I discovered it once the movie was all together. I was like, it's there. It's like the whole message of this movie is there in the first lines of these anchor songs. Yeah. There's a light in the distance. There's a light I've always followed. The Lord is my light. And it comes closer each time until he says, we speak about the light. And then it's like at the end, the declaration, the Lord is my light, and I will not be afraid. And I just think that's beautiful. That to me was orchestrated, not by my hands.
Going off that, the way you just described it, do you feel like the Lord did have a major hand to play in this film and just like how it developed and how it got released?
Very much so. I've written and directed a lot of stuff in the past where I feel like I made that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I wrote that story. Like I decided that there's an elephant and I decided that they said this. You know what I mean? And I felt like the creator. With this, I felt more like a custodian. Phil and I, we didn't feel an ownership of this. We felt a responsibility. Whenever I had a story problem, I didn't go, what should I do? What should I do? I was like, what should I do? And I'll go for a walk up the mountain. It's like, I don't know what the answer is. And because what we really didn't want to do was to have an agenda with this and say, we want people to feel like this when they leave the movie. Because it's like when you're reading scripture, you read a verse one day and it speaks to you in such a way. You read it a year later and it tells you something completely different. It's like, I never saw it like that. And you speak to someone else and it speaks to them in a different way. If we had come into this movie like we know what we're supposed to be doing, we know the message, everyone would walk out with the same message that we forced upon them. But we really wanted to hold it lightly and allow it to be led so that each person that leaves is touched in a way that they needed to be touched. And all I can say is we did our best for that to be the case. And whether or not it is, that'll be up to history.
You might have already answered this question, but where does the David movie rank among all your creative projects you've done in your life?
There was something in the water with this project. And it was so wonderful to observe everyone who worked on it, we all felt that we were working on something special. We all knew that we were working on a legacy project, that this is the one that we may never work on something like this again. One of our producers, Tim, he was like, this is the good old days, guys. Be very aware, we're working on probably what is the most significant project of our lives in this moment. Our production designer, Linton, not a week would go by where he wouldn't just say, I would rather not be doing anything else in the world. I would rather not work on any other project than this one. I cannot believe I get to be so lucky. So I think we all felt that this is, so Phil spoke of this, who's the co-director and the owner of the company. He said he was walking around Paris with his wife and he said, you come to the Arc de Triomphe and you see this incredible building. And he said, you can also walk down the streets of Paris and see apartment blocks. It's like with David, we want to make an Arc de Triomphe. You can make lots of money from blocks of flats and parking lots and this and that. But we wanted to make in David something that stood the test of time, that felt like an Arc de Triomphe. And so it really feels like that's what we've done. So absolutely, it stands in a different place to anything else I've worked on, and likely anything else I'll work on again.
How long ago was the David movie like greenlit where everybody was able to work on it full time and just, let's get this made?
There was an 18-month stint, 2019, 2020, where we turned on the taps. Production art was going in full. We started employing people. We started getting the pipeline ready. Then that stopped. So that kind of counts towards production. And then the taps turned on again, I think 2023. So that was probably like a 2-year stint of really running at it. And that was tight. So I'd say it was probably 3.5 years of taps fully turned on within that 10-year period.
So what are some responsibilities that you have for like directing an animation feature that the common person might not think up front in their mind? Like what all goes into making this happen?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that blows everyone's mind when they come for a tour of the studio is how very specialized departments there are, and that they touch only a small part of the production. As a director for an animated film, you're directing in slow motion because departments open up slowly one at a time. So if you're directing a live action movie, you've done a lot of prep work beforehand as a director, casting, locations and what have you. But when you say action, all the departments are working all at once, all at the same time in live action, right? The sets, so their props, hair, makeup, all this, and camera, lights, sound. Obviously there's special effects and post-production or what have you, but it's very immediate. In animation, it's incredibly slow because you first got to casting. Voice casting is one thing, but then you've got to draw your characters, and you've got to do a casting process where you look at a whole bunch of drawn pictures and then decide which is the character. Then that character's got to be modeled. They've got to be rigged. They've got to have clothing and cloth put on them and hair and fur, put on them. And that is an 8-month process to get your lead character, And then when you're directing the animators, if you're a live action director and you're directing Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise. Right. When you're directing animation, 40 different animators touch your lead actor. So to keep the consistency, make them feel, that adult David feels like adult David from shot to shot, because one person did this shot, the next person did this shot, and how do you make it feel the same? That's a whole nother thing. And then also you're directing not with lights turned on and not with grass and trees and things like that. So you're filling in a lot in your mind as a director, as you're directing an animation, like knowing that, okay, lighting's going to come, this is what it's going to look like, but you're not seeing that for a good 10 months. It's quite a process. And then just to jump quickly to the actual voice casting, what we wanted to do with this movie was we wanted it to feel timeless. We didn't want to have big name actors that people could recognize and they're like, oh, that's Morgan Freeman. Yeah. We don't want people be hearing people they know up there. We want them to believe, oh, that's David. Oh, that is Samuel. But we couldn't find our adult David as much as we tried. Like we found an incredible singer who we actually cast, but we couldn't get the performance out of him, the acting performance. So it was a real challenge. And then right late in the day, Phil Wickham was the last person we cast. We'd designed adult David already. We'd already started animating. It was really late in the day. And I think it was someone at Angels like, have you thought of Phil Wickham? And someone reached out to him and Phil was like, oh, I'd love to give that a go. And obviously we knew he could sing, but he needed to audition. Could he act, And we had a great casting director, Ned Lott, who helped Phil audition and did a lot of work with him to get him to not be Phil, but to be David. And it just worked out fantastically in the end. And I think when you watch the movie, you don't hear Phil Wickham, you do hear David, which is wonderful. Lots of work, a huge process, many moving parts.
Do you have any advice for specifically the do's and don'ts of adapting the Bible so it's not like cheesy, like some of those movies we all think of?
The challenge of directing something from the Bible, so advice is be honest, go to the Bible and trust it. It's survived this long and is God breathed. There's power there. You don't need to worry, but also be brave. I think a lot of people, when they make Christian content, they make it with, silk gloves on, and they're like, oh, they're too careful. And it's like, they try and be too reverent. It's like, God's got a sense of humor. And you as a Christian, when you watch other media, what you enjoy, make that as well. Do you know what I mean? So one of the reasons that I got into doing what I do is because why does Christian media have to be so meh? Why can't it be fantastic? Why can't it be gripping and entertaining and risky, and can do that and still be honoring? Go there, be brave and push the boundaries. We need it.
For directing in general or surviving in the entertainment world, because it's very easy for people just to, I give up.
So to me, do you really have your why? Why am I doing this? And will it sustain you when you can't see anything? when
Right.
things grow dark, when things aren't working out, is that spark still driving you? We've got a quote as you walk up the stairs in our studio from Lord of the Rings, from Gimli, which says, "Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for?" And that is very much Phil's philosophy. The code name for the project when we first started was HBD, which stands for, on the old maps, when people hadn't explored the world fully, they'd draw everything they knew, and then there'd be this sign, HBD, here, which means here be dragons, which is like, we don't know what's beyond here. Go here at your own risk. And that's the philosophy we took with making this movie, is like, we don't know if it's going to be successful. We've got no clue, but we're going because we know our why and we believe in it and we're willing to die for it. And you have to have that deep belief to sustain you through when you lose your funding. You've spent this many millions of dollars, the funding goes away. Do you crumble and say, okay, well, what else should we do? Or do you keep fighting? Do you keep going? And I can say the reason that the movie is what it is, that we finished, is because we had that mentality. Certainty of death, it's fine. Keep going. Oh, like, yeah, but this has happened. Yep, we knew there'd be challenges. So it's holding on to the deep call and the deep why.
For Sunrise Studios, what is in the future? Do you guys have any other projects that you currently have in development?
Fortunately for us, we moved straight into another project, which is almost like a service provider work, which has been fantastic. It's allowed us to continue to create and has provided funding for us for the next couple of years, do work on a great project, but it also has allowed us, in the background, we're developing 3 of our own projects, all very different flavors, one much more along the lines of David, then 2 other ones in a very different zone. And we're developing all of those, and who knows which one will come next. Yeah, there's a lot of plans for a lot of great movies ahead.
Oh, that makes me excited. Thank you so much for being on the show and agreeing to do an interview and everything.
Sure thing, absolute pleasure.